where legends breathe again. Eldmyth. They do not fight for glory, they decide who is worthy of death. The Valkyries are not just warriors, they are choosers of fate, carrying fallen heroes from the battlefield to Valhalla. But who were they truly? Goddesses, spirits, or something far darker? A whisper carried on the frigid wind that sweeps down from the snow-capped peaks of ancient Scandinavia. A shadow passing before the moon, swift and purposeful, more a shift in the fabric of the night than a mere silhouette. In the hallowed, hushed spaces between the crashing of thunder and the final, rattling breath of a hero on the battlefield, there is a presence, an echo of wings, not of feather and bone, but of something else, of destiny being woven and severed. This is not merely a creature of folklore. It is a force of mythic arbitration, a psychopomp of the highest order. We speak of the Valkyrie. To the Norse, the Vikings, the Skalds who sang by firelight, they were the choosers of the slain. But to reduce them to a simple function is to miss the profound and terrifying beauty of their essence. They exist in the liminal space between life and death, God and mortal, war and peace. They are the embodiment of battle's glorious tragedy, the fierce light that illuminates the darkest hour of man. Tonight, we journey not just into the cold north, but into the very heart of this legend. We will walk the blood-soaked earth of the battlefield, hear the clash of iron and look up, always up, to see who watches from the storm-racked sky, deciding with an inscrutable gaze who will feast in Odin's hall and who will be forgotten in the mud. To understand the Valkyrie, we must first descend into the world that birthed her, the Norse cosmos, a place of brutal majesty and profound poetry. This was not a universe of gentle gods. It was a realm sustained by struggle, where the great world tree, Yggdrasil, held the 9 realms in its roots and branches, and where even the gods knew their doom was foretold in the cataclysm of Ragnarok. Within this stark cosmology, Odin, the All-Father, ruler of Asgard, was consumed by a single driving purpose: to gather the greatest army of fallen heroes the worlds had ever seen. These warriors, the Einherjar, would fight at his side when the final battle dawned. But Odin could not be everywhere. His eye, sacrificed for wisdom, saw much but not all. He needed agents. Thus, from the very fabric of his will and the primal energies of battle itself, the Valkyries were formed. The earliest mentions are not of individual beings with names and personalities, but of a collective, terrifying phenomenon. In the Old Norse poem, the Grimnismal, they are described as Odin's maids who ride to choose who is to be slain. The very word Valkyrie, Valkyrja in Old Norse, breaks down into valor, meaning the slain on the battlefield, and kjosa, meaning to choose. They are fundamentally the choosers. These concepts were not confined to poetry. Archaeology provides haunting glimpses. Picture a craftsman in the 10th century, painstakingly carving a small piece of antler. Under his knife, a scene emerges: a woman, armed, offering a drinking horn to a horseman. This is the Valkyrie as a welcoming spirit, a guide to the afterlife, depicted on artifacts from the British Isles to Scandinavia. Runestones, those enduring granite canvases, sometimes show shadowy, armed female figures, their forms echoing alongside ships and serpentine beasts. The Gosforth cross in England, a fusion of Norse and Christian imagery, may even depict a Valkyrie holding a ring, a symbol of binding oath and destiny. These are not illustrations of gentle angels. They are memorials to a worldview where death in combat was not an end, but a potentially glorious transition, overseen by these formidable, otherworldly women. They were a part of the daily cultural fabric, an explanation for the chaos and chance of war, and a promise of honor beyond the grave. The perception of the Valkyrie evolved through the literature of the Middle Ages, particularly in the Icelandic Poetic Edda and Prose Edda. Here, they began to step out of the collective and into the individual. We learn their names: Hildur, meaning battle; Gurndal, she-wield of wand; Skurgal, shaker; and the most famous, Brynhildr, whose own tragic mortal-adjacent saga would be immortalized in the Völsunga saga and later Wagnerian opera. These names grant them personality, agency, and tragic depth. They are sometimes described as daughters of kings, mortal women elevated to this divine duty, or as semi-divine beings in their own right. They are Odin's will made manifest, but they are not mindless drones. The poetry hints at their own wills, their own desires, and sometimes their defiance of the very God they serve. This tension between duty and desire, between the impersonal machinery of fate and the pulse of individual heart, is what elevates the Valkyrie from a mythological function to a timeless archetype. The world the Valkyries inhabited was one of stark contrasts and immense scale. Their primary domain was the battlefield or Vurlur, but their travels spanned the branches of Yggdrasil. They would ride forth from Odin's great hall of Valhalla, a place of roaring fires, endless mead, and the clamor of the Einherjar training for Ragnarok. But their path was through the storm. Norse poetry is rich with descriptions of their movement. They did not simply fly, they rode. Their mounts were not typical horses, but celestial steeds that could gallop across the sky, their hooves striking lightning from the clouds. The poetic Edda describes this terrifying journey. Light burns from their mail coats, a brilliant light, with spears held high they ride. From the gleaming manes of their steeds, dew falls into the deep valleys and hail into the high woods. This is not a peaceful transit. It is a weather event, a geomagnetic storm given feminine form. The dew and hail are symbolic of their connection to fertility and harshness, life and death, a reminder that the Valkyrie's duty nourishes Valhalla even as it devastates the mortal realm below. Their appearance was designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Forget the simplistic image of a woman with feathered wings. The Valkyrie's power was armor, weapon, and aura. They wore gleaming brinjur, chainmail shirts that shimmered with an otherworldly light, often described as creating the aurora borealis itself, the northern lights being the flash of their armor as they rode. They carried spears, symbols of Odin and of piercing fate, and shields that could blot out the sun. Their helmets, sometimes winged or crested, framed faces that were almost always described as heartbreakingly beautiful, yet utterly impassive like ice-sculpted stone. This juxtaposition was key, a visage of feminine beauty wielded with martial, lethal purpose. Their hair, often golden or dark, would stream behind them like banners of war. They were a collage of lethal elegance, a perfect fusion of the attractive and the terrifying. To see one was to see your death or your glory made manifest. The symbolism woven into their very being is profound. They represented the inescapable randomness and selective horror of war. On a chaotic battlefield, why did one warrior fall from a stray arrow while another survived a dozen spear thrusts? The Norse answer was the Valkyrie's choice. They were the personification of weird or fate, not a predetermined, unchangeable path, but a web of cause and consequence, choice and chance, where their selection was the final, decisive thread pulled. They also symbolized a sacred, if brutal, exchange. The warrior offered his life, his courage, his very blood to the soil. In return, the Valkyrie, as an agent of the divine, offered immortality, honor, and a seat at the god's own table. It was a transaction at the very edge of existence, mediated by these fierce, unearthly women who moved through the realms as easily as a mortal might step from one room to another. How did the living, those left behind on the blood-soaked earth or those preparing for battle, interact with the concept of the choosers? There were no direct rituals to summon a Valkyrie. To do so would be to invite death itself. Instead, interaction was woven into the very fabric of martial and cultural life. Before a battle, a chieftain or king might make sacrifices to Odin, not to the Valkyries directly, but to the power they served. He would dedicate his upcoming actions and the lives of his men to the Allfather in hopes of winning his favor and, by extension, the favorable gaze of his choosers. The ritual might involve the casting of spears over the enemy host, echoing Odin's own act, or the offering of a valuable object into a bog or spring, a portal to the other world. The unspoken prayer was not for survival, but for valor. To die well was the goal, to die in such a spectacular fashion that the shimmering women descending from the storm could not possibly overlook you. Among warriors, There was a deep-seated belief in omens heralding a Valkyrie's presence or impending choice. On the eve of battle, a strange, unearthly light in the sky, perhaps the aurora, was seen as the flash of their armor. A sudden, localized hailstorm on an otherwise clear day could be the dew from their steeds' manes. Some accounts speak of a sound, a distant, beautiful, yet chilling song heard only by those marked for death, a weaving of fate through melody. The most visceral omen, however, was the Fylgja or Hamingja, a protective spirit often seen as an animal follower. In some tales, a warrior's Fylgja might appear to him as a majestic wolf or bear, but if it took the form of a woman, a tall, armed, severe woman, it was understood that his death was imminent, and his personal guardian had taken the shape of his guide to the afterlife. This blurred the line between Valkyrie and personal destiny, making the encounter deeply intimate and profoundly terrifying. For the families and communities left behind, the folklore was more about interpretation and acceptance. When news came of a loved one's death in a far-off land, the skalds would craft a narrative. They would not speak of a clumsy slip or a lucky strike by an enemy. They would sing of how the warrior had fought like a demon, hewing down foes until, surrounded by a ring of the dead, he finally looked up, smiled, and lowered his sword. The skald would describe a sudden shaft of sunlight breaking through the war clouds, and in that light the gleaming form of a chooser's extending a hand. The warrior's body would fall, but his spirit, his Hamingja, would be seen rising with her to Asgard. This was the consolation, the transformative folklore. Death was not a disappearance, but a translation. The Valkyrie was the translator, the psychopomp who turned a brutal end into the beginning of an eternal saga. They were the narrative device that allowed a culture steeped in violence to find meaning, honor, and even beauty in its darkest moments. One of the most complete and poignant myths that showcases the complexity of the Valkyrie is the tale of Sigurdrifa, meaning victory bringer. Her story, found in the Sigurdrifumal of the Poetic Edda, is not one of battlefield selection, but of rebellion, punishment, and a profound connection with a mortal hero. It begins with a battle not between men, but between kings favored by different gods. Odin had sworn victory to one aged king, Hjalmganar. Yet Sigurdrifa, surveying the field from her celestial vantage, saw the righteousness and courage in the heart of the opposing king, Agnar. In that moment, the impersonal mechanism of choice within her sparked into a flame of personal judgment. She defied the decree of the Allfather. She chose Agnar for victory and guided Odin's favor to his death. This was an act of breathtaking autonomy, a Valkyrie prioritizing her own moral compass over divine command. The wrath of Odin was swift and cruel. He did not destroy her, for she was still a being of purpose. Instead, he punished her with the very thing Valkyries administer, a sleep thorn, a magical sleep, and a curse of mortality. She was cast from the ranks of the choosers, stripped of her eternal duty, and placed in a shield-walled enclosure on a mountaintop, in a deep, enchanted slumber. Her armor became her prison. Her Valkyrie power was sealed away. This transformation is critical. It shows they are not inviolate. They possess free will, and that will carry consequences. Sigurdrifa's story introduces the theme of the Valkyrie who becomes, for a time, a mortal woman in need of rescue, blurring the lines between the divine agent and the fairy tale princess. But this is no passive sleeping beauty. Her sleep is a sentence, her enclosure a fortress, and her awakening will come with a price and a purpose. The scene of her imprisonment is one of eerie, suspended animation. Picture a high, lonely peak, windswept and barren, surrounded by a wall of shields whose rims gleam dully in the perpetual twilight. In the center, atop a stone dais, lies Sigurdrifa. She is in full battle regalia, her mail shirt like frozen silver, her spear by her side, her helmet casting a shadow over her peaceful, yet stern features. A magical fire of Vafalogi, a wavering flame, encircles the shield wall, a barrier not of heat but of enchantment flickering with impossible colors. Time does not touch her. Snow falls but does not settle on her armor. Lichen does not grow on the shields. It is a tableau of paused destiny, a monument to disobedience and the heavy hand of divine authority. She waits, a puzzle and a prize for the one mortal brave and worthy enough to penetrate the barrier and awaken her. The hero who finally reaches Sigurdrifa is Sigurd, the greatest of all Norse heroes, slayer of the dragon Fafnir. Having ridden through the magical fire on his mighty horse Granny, he finds the shield wall and cuts through the straps holding the shields together. The air inside is still and charged, like the moment before a thunderclap. He sees the slumbering Valkyrie, and struck by her majesty and the injustice of her prison, removes her helmet. He carefully cuts the constricting mail from her with his sword, Graham, an act both practical and symbolically intimate, a reversal of the armoring process. As the cold air touches her skin, Sigurdrifa awakens. Her first breath is a gasp that seems to pull the very wind back onto the mountain. Her eyes open, not with the disorientation of sleep, but with the immediate, piercing clarity of one who has been conscious in her dreams for centuries. Her first words are not of thanks, but of identity and loss. She recites a poem, listing the names and deeds of Valkyries she once rode with Gurndal, Hildur, Skurgal, a mournful roll call of a sisterhood she can no longer be part of. She tells Sigurd of her defiance and her punishment, her voice a blend of steel and sorrow. In this moment, she is fully realized, a fallen angel, brimming with divine knowledge and mortal regret. She is no longer simply a chooser. She is a repository of wisdom, a guide of a different sort. She then proceeds to teach Sigurd, the mortal hero, a vast array of sacred knowledge. She teaches him rune magic for victory, for healing, for eloquence in speech, for protection at sea. She imbues him with the very essence of the wisdom Odin hoards. This is her new role, the awakened one as mentor, transferring power from the marginalized divine to the worthy mortal. Their relationship is charged with a tragic, unfulfilled romance. They pledge themselves to each other, but fate, as always, intervenes. Sigurd must continue his journey, and Sigurdrifa, though awakened, is still marked by her mortal curse. They part, and the story is swept into the greater, doom-laden cycle of the Völsunga saga. Sigurdrifa is often conflated with the shield maiden Brynhildr, whose own tragic love for Sigurd leads to jealousy, vengeance, and death. The myth of Sigurdrifa thus completes a profound arc for the Valkyrie archetype, from obedient divine agent, to rebellious individual, to punished prisoner, to awakened wisdom giver, and finally, to a tragic heroine entangled in human passions. She embodies the entire spectrum, proving that the Valkyrie is not a monolithic symbol, but a vessel for exploring free will, consequence, love, loss, and the painful, beautiful intersection of the divine and human worlds. To see the Valkyrie in her pure, untempered element, we turn to the legendary Battle of Bravelir, a colossal conflict described in the Surgabrot and Gesta Danorum. This was not a mere skirmish, but a cataclysm of nations, a clash of such scale it was said to draw the attention of every power in the 9 realms. The air would have been thick with the din of thousands, the gut-wrenching screams of horses, the deafening crash of shield wall meeting shield wall, the sing-song whistle of arrows, and the wet chopping sound of axes finding their mark. Into this maelstrom of human extremity the Valkyries descended, but they did not fight. They observed, they assessed, they chose. Imagine a warrior, Harold the Stout, in the thick of the fray. He is exhausted, his shield splintered, his axe notched. He sees a comrade fall, then another. Despair begins to cloud his mind. Then a strange calm descends upon him. The noise seems to fade. He looks up. Through a gap in the swirling smoke and mist of breath and blood, he sees her. She is hovering just beyond the reach of the tallest spear, her form semi-transparent like a figure seen through heat haze. Her armor gleams with a soft, silver light untouched by grime or gore. Her eyes meet his. In that instant, there is no fear. There is only recognition and a profound, chilling sense of being seen, not as a man, but as a story, a potential saga to be collected. She nods, almost imperceptibly. At that moment, an enemy spear, which he should have seen coming, takes him in the side. He falls, but the pain is distant. His last sight is not of the mud or his killer, but of her descending, her form becoming more solid, her hand extended. She does not touch his body. She seems to gather something from his chest, a shimmering, ghostly double of himself, looking young and whole. As this essence rises with her, the noise of the battle rushes back in for a final second, then fades into a soaring, choir-like sound. He is chosen. Meanwhile, across the field, a young warrior named Einar fights with desperate, terrified fury. He is not brave, he is cornered. He strikes blindly, survives by luck. He too looks up and sees a Valkyrie, but her gaze passes over him, through him, as if he were made of glass. She turns her attention to a dying champion nearby. For Einar, the feeling is not of peace, but of a crushing, impersonal indifference. He has been judged and found wanting. He will live, but with the haunting knowledge that he was invisible to the divine at the moment of truth. This is the dual edge of the Valkyrie's gaze: glorious salvation for one, utter existential negation for another, all in the same heartbeat of the battle's pulse. While most tales focus on their role at death, some fragments of myth and local folklore hint at a different, more protective aspect of the Valkyrie. She could act as a Fylgjukona, a guardian spirit attached to a specific bloodline or a particularly favored individual. This relationship was not about choosing death, but about guiding and protecting life towards a destined, glorious end. Imagine a young prince, born under a prophesied star. From his childhood, he feels a presence. In the deep forest where he learns to hunt, he sometimes catches a glimpse of a woman in gray standing between the trees, watching. She is there when he first successfully wields a sword, a faint, approving smile on lips no one else can see. In dreams, she speaks to him not in words but in feelings, impulses of caution, surges of courage, insights into strategy. This bond culminates at the moment of his fated crisis. Perhaps his hall is besieged by rivals. He is outnumbered, the doors are buckling. As he prepares for his final stand, he feels not fear but a strange warmth at his back. He turns, and for the first time his family and retainers see her too. A fully manifest Valkyrie, her armor gleaming in the firelight of the burning hall, standing shield to shield with him. She does not fight for him, she fights with him. Her presence bolsters his spirit and those of his men. They fight with the strength of 10, and though many fall, the prince survives the night, his legend secured. At dawn, as the smoke clears, she is gone. But on the ground where she stood, they find a single, perfect raven feather, Odin's bird, a sign that his guardian was both his protector and, ultimately, an agent of the All-Father's wider design. This version of the Valkyrie complicates her nature further. She is a shepherd of destiny, nurturing the hero along a path that she knows will still, one day, end under her gaze on a battlefield far away. The echoes of the Valkyrie's wings have reverberated far beyond the Viking Age, transforming and adapting to the needs of each new era. The 19th century, with its romantic nationalism, saw a powerful resurgence. In Germany, Richard Wagner's monumental opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, forever altered the popular image. His Walküre Valkyrie gave us Brunhilde, a daughter of Wotan Odin, whose defiance and humanity are central to the drama. Wagner's vision, complete with horned helmets, flowing robes, and the iconic Ride of the Valkyries music, cemented a bold, dramatic, and slightly Wagnerian aesthetic that still dominates. Even if the horned helmets are ahistorical, they are now mythically true in the public consciousness. The 20th and 21st centuries have seen the archetype fractured, examined, and rebuilt through countless lenses. In fantasy literature and film, she is the ultimate warrior woman. From the shield maidens of the Lord of the Rings to the fierce, complex Valkyrie characters in Marvel's Thor films, she represents feminine power untethered from traditional roles. Modern interpretations often strip away the chooser aspect and amplify the warrior, making her a heroic figure in her own right, fighting for her own causes. Video games like God of War and Assassin's Creed Valhalla portray them as formidable bosses or allies, focusing on their martial prowess and otherworldly nature. These versions often explore their loneliness, their ancient wisdom, and their tension between duty and a desire for a different existence. The symbolism has evolved from fatalistic acceptance to empowerment. Where the ancient Valkyrie represented the inescapability of fate in war, The modern Valkyrie often symbolizes the taking of one's fate into one's own hands. She is a symbol of agency, of choosing one's own battles and one's own way to glory. The connection to death remains, but it is often reframed as a mastery over life and death, a guide for others rather than a passive arbiter. She appears in modern art, tattoos, and music, a symbol of strength, protection, and fierce beauty. In some corners of modern heathenry and pagan practice, the Valkyrie is invoked as a spiritual guide for those processing grief, trauma, or seeking courage. A far cry from the terror she once inspired on the battlefield, yet a testament to the archetype's depth and adaptability. So what is the Valkyrie? She is the shadow in the thunderhead, the gleam in a dying warrior's eye, the whisper of fate in the roar of war. She is a paradox, both a collective force of nature and an individual with a name and a will. She is the hand that closes the eyes of the slain and the voice that sings their saga into eternity. From the anonymous choosers of the Eddas to the tragic heroine Sigurdrifa, from the guardian spirit in the forest to the iconic figure soaring through modern fantasy, her essence remains constant. She is the bridge between mortality and immortality, between courage and its reward, between the chaotic, bloody reality of human conflict and the ordered, glorious myth we build from its ashes. She tells us that the Norse did not see death as an end, but as a moment of intense, transformative scrutiny. In the Valkyrie's gaze, a life was weighed, measured, and given meaning. She represents the human yearning for our struggles to be witnessed, for our sacrifices to matter to something greater than ourselves. As the fires of the old beliefs banked into embers, and the longboats settled into their final resting places, the Valkyrie did not vanish. She simply found new skies to ride, new stories to inhabit, new dreams in which to appear at the crucial moment. She endures because she answers a fundamental need, the need for our endings to have a witness, for our bravery to have a herald, and for the long, dark night after battle to be pierced, now and always, by the promise of a gleaming, undying dawn. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.